Hey YouTube, long time no see. I've been through some downright tectonic shifts in my circumstances. It's not going to seem immediately relevant, but bear with me. You see, there is a man I've grown up calling Father, whom I've recently begun to doubt this about. You see, he is the only one of 4 children to grow up to convert to Mormonism, and subsequently to embrace this notion that it's not possible to have too many children. Yet he is also the only one of these 4 children to have had only one. I am a child from his first marriage. Since then, he has gotten married twice more, and each of these times have been to women he met through his church. Fellow Mormons who presumably shared this ethic about having as many kids as possible. These women each had children from a previous marriage, yet neither managed to have any with him. He was with each of these women for several years. He was also with my mother for several years before she had me. Yet she tells me he once accused her of having had an affair, and when she was in the hospital, in labor, he refused to be present, and his explanation for this was that he was under the impression that talking to her nurses was just as good as talking to her. All my life, he has referred to me as my boy and my kid, instead of my son. None of this makes any sense, unless my mother had to have an affair to conceive me, and he knows it. If that's the case, then it makes perfect sense. Now back to the main subject. I applied for disability. As is the norm in my country, I was declined and got an attorney. Now let me just take a moment to say that I don't care for the appeals process in this country. I lost count of how many times it seemed clear to me that by the time I got to the end of it, they would say, well, if you've made it this far, you can't possibly be disabled, so your application is declined. I didn't know how long she would be fighting for me, and as it turned out it was too long for me to get the rent I needed to hang on to my apartment. But in preparation for this, I resumed contact with my extended family, who helped me move my possessions into storage. I have an aunt and uncle in town, who were willing to cover the cost of the storage unit, a simple 5x5. And an aunt and uncle in another state who were willing to send me $200 a month to cover my other expenses. My mother, stepfather, and half-sister live in a different state, and were thus far not part of this, and my old man, that's what I call him, was also not involved because he's abusive. For the next few months, I drifted. I ate ramen noodles and fast food, and showered at the gym. For sleep accommodations, I had a sleeping bag and a bedroll, which I usually pitched in obscure parts of the storage facility. But once in a while I would spring for a hotel room. No, I've never stayed in a homeless shelter. But then, one day, I checked my P.O. box and found an announcement from Social Security that my attorney's efforts had succeeded, and I would now be getting $1,000 a month from them. I couldn't believe it. And I don't mean that as a euphemism. I mean, for a moment, I actually could not believe it. I was certain the two would be at it for a year, and here they were producing this result after only a few months. And of course, this wasn't just $1,000 starting that month, but retroactive to the date that I filed. So suddenly there was this huge glut of money in my account. Now right here, let me pause to emphasize this point. If you are disabled, file without delay. The longer Social Security makes you wait, the bigger the initial glut is going to be. If they make you wait for 2 months, they will pay you for 2 months. If they make you wait for 6 months, they will pay you for 6 months. If somehow you end up waiting for 2 years, you may wish to start car shopping. I would just be concerned about making ends meet in the meantime. Now, I don't remember the exact balance that had been deposited into my account, but it was more than $5,000. Of course, I was pretty happy about that. I don't remember what I did that night, it was a while ago, but pretty soon thereafter I moved into a 10 by 10 unit and closed out the 5 by 5 that my extended family had been paying for. I did not tell them I had done this. I figured they would find out when they received their next bank statement and noticed that the balance was a bit higher than they expected. Now, before I continue, I should explain that the $1,000 a month is now $1,100. But this is still not enough to cover any of the unsubsidized rent in this area. Not if one observes the 30% rule, which it seems all the landlords in the area are doing. To rent a property, I have to be able to bring in enough that rent is 30% of my revenue. I don't know if this is the case elsewhere, but it is the case here. I slept in my storage unit, not minding at all, toasty warm under all my layers. I spent the days using Wi-Fi, going to Khan Academy, studying math, and going to counseling as well. My counselor was very concerned that I might get caught, since it stands to reason that the folks who own the storage facility are sure not to like having someone sleep there. Despite my best efforts, one day they did find out. They gave me a period, I don't remember how long, to get moved out. This brought me down, and what pissed me off was when I went to a nearby van rental, planning to move to another facility. The people there refused to help me, even though I could afford their services. But the part that pissed me off was that they refused to let me go. They asked for my ID, and I gave it to them, but then they kept asking for something, I don't remember what, that I couldn't give them. And then they refused to give me back my ID. How hard is it to just give someone back their ID? You don't have X? I don't, but you still have my ID. Well, maybe, but don't you have X? I'm afraid not, but I would like my ID. Well, sure, but don't you have X? One, I'm afraid I don't. Could you just give me back my ID? Don't you have X? How hard can it be to just give someone back their ID? It's a dinky little piece of plastic. But anyhow, I did finally persuade them to give me back my ID, and since I couldn't rent the van, I ended up using a two-wheeler and the bus to move to a different storage facility. And since these were my means, I took the entire day. I was the only guy on the bus with a two-wheeler. This event was pretty stressful. But wouldn't you know, after a few more months in the other storage facility, they also found out. So at this point, I was faced with a pressing dilemma. Do I continue looking over the rental market, hoping an opening will appear? Do I continue moving from one storage facility to another, hoping for one where they won't notice me? Or do I go back to my family and hope they won't deliver me right back into my old man's waiting hands? This was, after all, one reason I had held off on the third of these. I had worked so hard to keep contact with my family to a minimum. The more contact I have with my extended family, the more likely they are to deliver me right into my mother's waiting hands, and once that happens, the more likely she will be to deliver me right into my old man's waiting hands. The waiting hands of someone she divorced when I was 3 because she did not want to be abused. The really wild part is, if I'm not really related to him, then I'm not really related to any of the aunts and uncles who have been supporting me either. It was at this point that another option crossed my mind. A way to escape all these options. I decided to make an attempt on my own life. I don't remember all the details of it, but I'm given to understand that's typical. I went to a gun dealer. I don't know much about guns, but I know how to use one responsibly. They ran a background check on me. At first that caused me some concern, because I had been hospitalized for suicidal ideation. but after a brief wait, I cleared. I also bought a box of ammunition. Now, I have read about how to disappear, and one thing they talked about in there was the sort of thing that happens to guns that are abandoned. They talked about the way they have of walking off and being used in crimes. I didn't want that to happen, so I figured it probably wouldn't if there was a locked door in the way. So I checked into a hotel. From here on, I don't remember the details, but I can infer from the evidence. There's a bullet hole under my chin, and another in the top of my skull, and a blurred patch in my left eye's field of vision, through which I can discern neither fairly fine print nor the color red. When I look at a red light bulb, it looks light green to my left eye. When they wheeled me into the hospital, my face was badly bruised. It would be another 3 weeks before I regained consciousness. When I did, they asked me what year it was, and I said that it was 2007. Losing track of the year and losing memories are both symptoms of traumatic brain injury, which is just the sort of thing that happens with a bullet through the brain. My in-town uncle interceded on my behalf to remove my stuff from storage. At someone's urging, I don't remember whose, I am now back in contact with my mother, and she has not tried to get me back in contact with my old man. That's the wild part. The part I was most desperate to accomplish, I have actually managed to accomplish, and all it cost me was my ability to operate a motor vehicle. Here I am, over and over again, saying to everyone, stop putting me in touch with him, stop putting me in touch with him, stop putting me in touch with him, and feeling the whole time like I'm wasting my breath because no one is listening. Turns out, all I had to do to make everyone listen was to risk my own life. I don't know, it feels like kind of a ripoff. So after another week in the first hospital, they moved me to a rehab hospital. And after another couple weeks of that, they checked me into a motel that charged me exorbitantly. Finally, they moved me into subsidized housing. But that is a subject for another video.